So, welcome everyone. My name is Kirsten Bayer with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University, and I will be your moderator and your technical support for this session. So, if you have any technical issues or questions as the session proceeds, you can feel free to reach out to me via the chat. Just a couple of things, housekeeping things before we get started with our presenter, Allison Dixon, today. Firstly, I wanted to let everyone know that you do have the capability to unmute yourselves, but we ask that you refrain from doing that until the end of the session. And you can, we'll have an opportunity for a live Q&A with Allison. You can ask any live questions then, and feel free to unmute yourselves, turn your cameras on, have full capabilities. But we just ask that you refrain from doing that throughout the session so that way Allison can get through her presentation. If you do have questions as the session is going on, feel free to post those in the chat and we will address those throughout and then at the end as well. Allison is going to have some engagement today, so feel free to participate, sorry. Feel free to participate in those polls that we're going to have for you. And if you have any issues with those, feel free to let me know via the chat. I also wanted to reiterate that this session is recorded, and the recording and the PowerPoint slides will be up on the JTED NOFO website. I'll put that website in the chat momentarily. And then I also have this slide deck here. I'll post a link in the chat so you can follow along if you would like to momentarily as well. And then I also just wanted to make note that we are offering closed captioning capabilities for accessibility. And if you would like to turn those on, you just simply click live transcript, enable closed captions or view full transcript, and you should be able to see those closed captions live for you. And I believe that is all I have. I'm going to hand it off to our presenter today, Allison Dixon, and she can start us off.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. Kirsten, all sounds good?
Yep, you sound great, and I can see the slide deck. Looks good.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Before we get started, I just have a couple of quick things that I want to make sure I share with everybody. In the chat box, I'm putting right now a link to a Google form. If this is just a really basic registration for this webinar, I realize that you all already did registrations, but since I work for another big bureaucracy that likes to collect personal information, I would just appreciate folks fill that out for me as well. But importantly, also, one of the markers that I'm going to be collecting is your email. And this is important because we will be having future events. I am planning currently for a much longer, much more in-depth train the trainer course done in partnership with Chicago Jobs Council this spring or next spring. And this will be something that's available for frontline staff of different state agencies and then also organizations that contract with different state agencies on really kind of getting into the nuts and bolts and details of the topic that we're going to discuss this afternoon. So please share your contact information with me, and then I'll make sure that you get on that mailing list so that you can find out about upcoming events. So with that, I will get started. So we're going to talk about worker rights today, and that is a very large topic that in 1.5 hours, we are really just going to skim the surface. And so my hope is that really this is going to be kind of an introduction and will be something to kind of get people's brain juices flowing, your feet wet, excited to think more and think deeply about these issues, and then hopefully join us for future events where we kind of get into more details. Just quickly about me, my name is Allison Dixon. I'm a senior instructor in the School of Labor and Employment Relations at the U of I. I am an economic researcher, and so I spend a lot of my time doing pretty extensive research projects on behalf of at the bequest of the governor's office and then also the mayor's office in Chicago. And so I look at different issues that are affecting workers across our state, and in particular low-wage workers, and then also kind of looking at the intersections of all the different legislation that's on the horizon and all the different well-being issues that I think affect all of us and are particularly acute for folks who are not earning family supporting wages and have variable schedules. So these are things that I study in depth. And then I also direct and teach in the Worker Rights Project, which is a U of I initiative that provides bilingual worker rights training for low-wage workers. And so, like I mentioned before, I will be conducting this trainer course for frontline staff in the spring. And I'm also going to be sharing with you all some additional materials. We have a curriculum that really goes into depth about how to teach worker rights in a job training environment, and it's free and open access, and so that's something I highly encourage everybody to look at. So today, for the next 90 minutes, we're just gonna briefly look at kind of some of the different ways that this topic, this subject matter, can connect to job training programs in general. But thinking beyond job training programs, I think that I've had a lot of success in the last 11 years that I've been in this position, connecting this kind of work with a whole lot of different publicly facing programs. So whether it's something that has to do with immigrant rights or just other sort of social service programs, even in a healthcare setting, and thinking about like just kind of the different types of occupations that are like actively seeing these issues in the field and have a chance to interject and perhaps like point out to their clients when there's potentially an issue and what resources are available to them. I think that there are lots of different ways we can connect this information to existing work we're already doing. And certainly my intention is not for anybody to try to add more work to their already busy schedules. I think that we've thought really smartly about how we can connect this stuff with work you're maybe already doing. Just as a quick 101, just since we don't have a lot of time together, I'm going to cover some of the main issues that I think are really important for workers across our state and workers across the country. And so that'll include wage theft. So that's the different ways that workers lose money on the job, kind of looking at some of the different laws that protect workers depending on where they work. Misclassification, which is a huge issue right now, and I'm going to get into that in a lot more detail. Also workers' comp, what happens when you're injured on the job, and then different types of discrimination. Most important with all these is thinking about documenting strategies. And so one thing that I always stress with my students is that laws are constantly evolving and changing, and then enforcement of these laws also changes depending on what the different administrations in power and their desire to protect worker rights. And so the one thing that is constant are the strategies that one needs to employ in order to protect their rights on the job. And so we're really going to be kind of focusing with each of these issues on how one could document their problems and protect their rights if they wanted to stand up for them. And then, if there's any final questions, we'll go over that. I want to make sure that folks have my email. It's up here, aquesada@illinois.edu. That's the best way to get a hold of me. So please feel free to reach out if you have any other additional questions or issues afterwards. So like we said before, you can put questions in the chat box, turn on your camera if you like. And then also I just as I'm doing this Zoom from home, and I'm sure a number of you are probably still at home, it's just kind of keep in mind that we're all navigating difficult challenges. I know my son is going to walk in the door in the next 45 minutes, and I texted him to remind him that I was teaching this afternoon, but inevitably his 11-year-old brain is going to forget that. So hopefully he's not going to come in with a crew of his friends, but just trying my best. I would encourage everyone as they're listening today to, kind of actively think about these issues. And one way I do that is by keeping track of quotations, something that's been said that really stands out, writing down questions, and then also writing down potential talking points or issue areas that you might want to bring up with a colleague later. Hopefully, this subject will spark a lot of interest, not only in things that connect with your own professional lives, but also things that are maybe going on with your families and your friends and your communities. So I think this is obviously a topic that touches all of us. So why teach worker rights? Well, I already mentioned this concept of wage theft. And so that's all the different ways that money gets stolen from workers on the job. There are many different ways that happens. But I worked on a study in 2008, 2009 that was out of UIC. And so this is now 12 years ago. And we were able to measure at that point that every single week, $7.3 million was being stolen from low-wage workers just in Cook County. So that is a very sizable amount that with inflation obviously has increased. And that is just in one county in our state. And we only measured a couple of different ways that wage theft happens. And so we measured, we looked at workers who weren't earning even the legal minimum wage at the time and workers who were working off the clock. There are lots of other ways that it also happens, but just with those two figures. Oh, and also we looked at people who weren't earning the legal overtime rate of time and a half over 40 hours in a week. So $7.3 million a week just in Cook County. And so we really think of that as an epidemic, right? That's money that's being diverted from families that need it, from communities that need those investments. We know that workers don't learn this information anywhere else, that currently there's no real comprehensive high school program to teach worker rights. There are some legally required posters that employers have to hang up in break rooms and on bulletin boards, but oftentimes those are outdated or are written in languages or in kind of government speak that's difficult for people to interpret. And so there is no real comprehensive education program for workers for the most part to learn their rights on the job. And then in addition to that, we have this confusing patchwork of laws. And so we have different minimum wages in Illinois, depending on where you work. We have different laws that allow some workers to take paid time off, paid sick leave. There's different anti-discrimination laws. And so I certainly have the experience where I'll be teaching maybe on the southeast side of Chicago, and I'll have workers in my classroom who some of them work in Chicago, some work in Calumet City, some work in Hammond, Indiana, and just there alone, you've got 3 different minimum wage laws that affect or that impact those people. And so that's a confusing system to navigate for most of us, let alone if English isn't your first language or you're not from this area. And so when I'm thinking about these issues, and particularly when I'm doing my research, I think about all these kind of just different intersections between kind of the changing nature of work, how work for the most part and employment relations have really been degraded over the last 40 years. And a lot of the protections that workers used to have don't exist so much. But that when you add on top of that, so many of the different social and economic inequities that we see in our society, that we have even more, even higher levels of abuse and issues. So for the worker who is English isn't their first language and is an immigrant to this country and is and as a woman and as a mother, like they are experiencing issues that other folks like wage theft that all workers experience or most workers experience, but they are experiencing on an even much higher incidence. And that goes for all these different types of discriminations. And so we see, especially when you have folks who are serving different populations, whether they be formerly incarcerated people who are going to face discrimination, or folks with different sorts of physical or mental disabilities, that like we see discrimination and these issues kind of really heightened. And it's in those moments that I think that we have a real opportunity to help folks navigate how they can actually document these issues and enforce their rights on the job. And so kind of in connecting with workforce development and just with social service programs in general, I think that like when we're preparing people to be job ready, we really have expanded that definition to include knowing your rights as a worker. That if you are doing trainings on financial literacy, that in my mind should include discussion about protecting against wage theft and other workplace violations. And that, quite honestly, like this partnership between job training programs and mission-driven community-based organizations, this is a program that works and is pretty tried and true. And a lot of organizations have taken up this platform and now are having great success in incorporating this information. But like I said, there's this curriculum, open access that we developed. It's available for free download. Kirsten, maybe if you, if you don't mind, we could put that link in the chat box too. But the third edition came out in 2019. I'm currently fundraising to try to get money for a new updated edition next year. And what our hope is that with next year's, the 2022 edition, it will be even more comprehensive. And so we're really looking to do kind of supplemental chapters that have focuses on particular industries. So worker rights, particularly in construction sectors and building trades, worker rights in healthcare, worker rights in culinary trades. And our hope then is that something that could be easily used in different adult education settings. We also are working with folks at Chicago Public Schools and the Chicago Teachers Union to think about what a curriculum would look like for young workers and future workers. And so for high school juniors and seniors in Illinois who have to take a consumer education class, in addition to learning how to balance a checkbook and some of the things that they do that I think at times seem a little bit outdated, having a unit on protecting your rights as a worker seems to make a lot of sense to us. And so just very briefly, the curriculum, it's composed of 8 different units. They all have pick and choose modules. And so kind of recognizing that none of you all have time to go through all 8 chapters with the folks you serve. Each chapter is really is comprised of these different types of activities ranging from 5 minutes to 45 minutes so that you can fit in whatever makes sense for your schedule. And they are crafted so that they can be used with folks with different levels of English language comprehension and different learning styles and reading levels. And so there's lots of different really good stuff there. And so, as I mentioned before, the goal really is to try to connect worker rights to existing programs that you're already doing. So, for example, if you are practicing interviewing skills with your job seeking clients, it is a very good time and a good place to talk about recognizing illegal discrimination in hiring and what are the tricks that some employers engage in to discriminate, from the onset. So that there's activities on that. Or if you are doing, let's see, like reading and writing skills, I think that like, or math skills. There's lots of different things that have to do with reading and understanding and comparing employee handbooks and employee manuals and union contracts, or practicing journal keeping. So recording who, what, where information about incidents and problems. And so all these different things I think connect to a lot of units that you might be already doing. And so here's like a sample activity. It's got this paycheck stub and you're practicing math skills and also practicing reading a check stub and having folks identify what's wrong here. What's just from this screenshot, like the goal is for somebody to be able to figure out, okay, well, this person's just getting paid straight time for their overtime hours. And so that's a violation of law, violation of federal law. So before we kick off, I just want to make sure, Kirsten, no questions? No, we're good? I think so. Okay.
Nope, no questions.
So, and if I'm going too fast, please let me know. Keeping an eye on the time. So this is like just a 101, just a real brief introduction, but I want us to explore strategies for protecting workers on the job. And I want you to assume that the workers in every case study work in Illinois, are at least 16 years old, and are non-union workers, so at will, okay? And these are all stories that I've heard from different students of mine over the years. I've changed their names and their employers, but I think that they are really applicable to a lot of the folks that we serve. And I think that there are ways that you can change these kind of scenarios to make them fit lots of different situations that folks are facing. Oops. Sorry. All right. So I am gonna just read it out loud, and then we're gonna do a poll answering the question here. So Ryan, sorry. I don't know what happened. Can you still see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Oh. Okay. Sorry. Ryan of Fast and Easy Painters hires a few painters for a paint job in Bolingbrook. He says he will pay them $15 an hour and that they must start work on Monday morning at 8 a.m. On Tuesday, one of the painters, Peter, slips and falls off the scaffolding and breaks his ankle. Ryan claims Peter was responsible for his medical bills because he hired him as an independent subcontractor. What do you think? So the question in the poll will be, pull up the poll question, Kirsten, is
yeah, there you go. I have it pulled up. It says Ryan claims Peter is responsible for his medical bills because he hired him as an independent contractor. What do you think? Yes or no? Yes, Peter is responsible, or no, he is not responsible.
I cannot see the poll. How come?
Probably just because you're sharing your slides.
Oh.
But once everybody answers here, we'll give them a couple more seconds. I will end the poll and then share the results, and you should be able to see the results.
Awesome.
Okay, let's go ahead and end that, and then I'm sharing the results now. I'm not sure if you could see that, Allison, but about 7, half and half. So half of the group said yes, half said no.
Okay, now I can see it. Once I do, all right, so we can see that even with a group of experts like the folks on this call, that there's a lot of division and confusion about this. So we're gonna go over the answer. So the answer is no, that Peter is not an independent subcontractor. And there's lots of different issues that I covered in just this one example. And so we're going to go over it kind of one by one, and then also talk about what, happens in reality, right? Because we all know that like a situation like this happens all the time. There was a study done a number of years ago that showed that upwards of 50% of construction workers in Illinois are at some point misclassified as misclassified as independent contractors when legally they should be employees. And there's reasons why that happens. And so we're going to talk about all this, but and then we're going to talk about what Peter can do to address this kind of situation. So the questions that I would ask if I was presenting this kind of scenario to a group of workers, we could really we could get into the weeds and spend an hour debating this scenario. And it's because I think most folks have had experiences where they've worked in precarious situations. And this is certainly a precarious situation. And it can get even more precarious if I start adding additional variables. So the first important question is Peter an independent contractor or an employee? How do you know, and why does this matter? So I'm just going to go back and we're going to look at why it is that just based on the clues I gave you, we know that Peter should be an employee and not an independent contractor. And so when you're trying to discern the difference between an independent contractor and an employee, it really comes down to control. Who has control over the working conditions? And so Ryan, who owns this painting company, is controlling the rate of pay, $15 an hour, and he's controlling the schedule. He's saying you need to be here Monday morning at 8 a.m. That looks very different than the painter that I hire to come, paint my living room, and he says the job's going to cost $500 and he can't start till next Wednesday, right? But you can see how there is a lot of gray area, and that certain employers take advantage of that gray area. And I think, it's always exciting having these discussions with students because they have a million examples for the most part of times that this has happened to them. And it doesn't have to be with construction. This happens in lots of different kinds of industries. And one of the biggest myths that I hear all the time is that it's because Peter didn't sign anything, and that's why he didn't sign any sort of contract with Ryan, and that's why he can be called an independent contractor. And for some reason, this myth has just been ingrained in folks' heads that when we sign things, and that's what makes things legit. And when it comes to work, that's really not the case. These laws exist regardless of whether or not somebody signs a document. And that the reverse is true. So even if you sign a document, it doesn't mean that you're waiving your rights under state and federal laws. And so based on the scant details I gave you, I would say that Ryan has control over the working conditions. And so he is the employer of record. And as such, he has to provide or carry workers' comp insurance for any employee who's working for him. And workers' comp is the system that's in place for all employees when they're injured on the job, regardless of fault. And so if Peter falls, and even if he just, works for Ryan one day, workers' comp legally is supposed to be what's covering him to make sure that all his medical bills are taken care of. And so it matters, the second question, third question, why it matters that Peter's an employee as opposed to an independent contractor is, as an employee, you're just entitled to many more benefits on the job, right? So in addition to workers' comp, having insurance that'll pay for you if you're sick or injured on the job, he should be entitled to unemployment insurance when he is out of work. He should be accruing money in Social Security, and any other benefits that are, that an employer might be providing their workers. And so, I mean, I think that like this is something that we can see how, especially in construction, which has a practice of subcontracting and, subcontractors hiring other subcontractors, these lines are blurred, but it's very important for workers to realize, even if they're in a situation where they suspect that they're being misclassified, and, the easiest way to suspect that is kind of look how you're being paid. If you're just being paid cash or just being, paid straight time, with no deductions, you're likely being misclassified. Even in that case, if Peter's doing a good job of kind of documenting, or keeping track of the employer of record and the addresses he's working in and everything else, he should be able to still get workers' comp if he's doing what he needs to do to protect himself. So where things get complicated is what happens to, what happens to Peter when Shady Ryan is, vanishes in the wind. So Peter goes to the hospital, he's got this $5,000 hospital bill. He calls Ryan's cell phone, but it's disconnected. What can Peter do then? And this is where you get really interesting conversations with folks, just kind of thinking, what are all the different solutions? What are all the different tactics? So perhaps he, goes to the house where they were working and knocks on the door, and asks the homeowner, do you have more information for that roofing contractor or painting contractor you hired? But maybe there's a language barrier, or maybe there's some other reason why the homeowner won't talk to him. So that's, could work, but not necessarily. What if Peter's undocumented? So he doesn't have the legal permission to even work in this country. Does that make a difference? It doesn't legally, but we know in reality it does, because employers like Ryan are purposely hiring precarious workers like Peter, knowing that they are more easily able to take advantage of them. And so this is why we see workers like Peter and lots of other day laborers, just finding jobs from the Home Depot parking lot, right? And then you see contractors going up and saying, I need 3 painters for the day, or I need, a laborer for the day. Even if Ryan hires Peter from the Home Depot parking lot, Peter still legally is an employee. Even if Peter is undocumented, and is just getting the job there for the day or for the week, legally he's still an employee and is provided the same sort of protections, rights and protections that any other legally authorized worker would have in this country. And the reason that's the case is because if you can imagine what would be the scenario if the 12 million undocumented immigrants we have in this country weren't afforded any protections under the law, any sort of employment law protections, then you would have a whole host, even more Ryans out there who are taking advantage and really lowering the bar, lowering the floor, the wage floor for all of us, right? For citizens, because there would be many millions of workers who were willing potentially to accept less favorable working conditions and not entitled to any sort of protection or any sort of guarantee that they could get, enforce these rights and get their money back. So as it currently stands with both our state Department of Labor and with the US Department of Labor, both of those enforcement agencies do not ask immigration status. But this is something that, especially when I'm working with groups that are serving a lot of immigrant workers, we spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about, because under the previous federal administration, it was not safe for undocumented workers to file complaints with the US Department of Labor because there was a very real concern that they could be deported because of that. But now under President Biden, there's a MOU that exists between the Department of Labor and Homeland Security saying that their agencies won't share this kind of information, that it's in the interest of the US government to protect worker rights. So I'm thinking about kind of other information that Peter could be collecting. You know, I would suggest that he should be talking to his coworkers, you know, making sure that like if he's working with a crew that day, that at least he gets their names and numbers. That way, maybe, you know, when he is trying to find Ryan and Ryan has vanished, perhaps they have some other lead. And you know, what we get to when we discuss this scenario in my classroom, the kind of the place where we get to after creating a long list of different documenting strategies that Peter might employ, is that what saved him in the end, and this is, like I said, these are real stories that I heard from students of mine, is that Peter took a photo of Ryan's license plate number when Ryan picked him up at the Home Depot parking lot. That the workers, the day laborers at this Home Depot had heard about these scams going on. And so they just kind of got into the practice of every time they were picked up for a job, just with their cell phones, taking a picture of the license plate. The Illinois Department of Labor under this administration will absolutely go after Ryan with just that license plate number. That's a very good identifying information. So these are, you know, it's just kind of, it's thinking outside the box, but the point is to really think about when you're in a precarious situation and you are very vulnerable, what tools do you have at your disposal? And then also, like, you know, kind of as a last question is, how would this change if Peter were to take this job in Indianapolis? And so this is where I really like to help folks kind of think about the political economy of all this and how so many of these rights and protections we have just because we're working in Illinois. So if Peter wanted to file for workers' comp in Indianapolis, he would have a lot less, he would be afforded a lot less protections. And I'm not going to go too much into the weeds about that, but just to be known that like workers' comp in Indianapolis, I mean, in Indiana is a very weak system compared to what we have in Illinois, which is one of the strongest in the country. So here, these slides, and I think you all will get copies of the slides. These just kind of goes into the differences, like I said, about the differences between independent contractors and employees. And so you can think about how lots of different types of jobs, whether they be a particular building trade or computer tech, accountant, nanny, hairstylist, house cleaner, often they work on their own as their own bosses, but many times they are working for another company. And so you've got to really kind of explore the working conditions and see who has control. And that is how you determine who legally should be a contractor and who should be an employee. So this term misclassification is what we use. And so like another example of this in a different industry would be the cleaning agency that classifies its workers as independent contractors, even though the company sets the schedules and provides the cleaning equipment. And like I said, these are lots of different differences between being an employee, the benefits and rights you're entitled to as opposed to an independent contractor. Just a little bit more about workers' comp. I want, workers' comp, I'm not a workers' comp attorney, and so I'm always very hesitant to speak too much about it, other than it's so important for folks to know that if they are injured on the job, that in Illinois, we have the right to go to our own doctor to file the workers' comp claim. And if you don't like the opinion of your doctor, you can get a second opinion. In a state like Indiana, if you get injured on the job, yes, you're entitled to workers' comp, but you have to go to you have to file your workers' comp claim based on what on the clinic or the provider that the employer chooses. And so the problem with that is that you end up seeing a lot of injured workers who are not given the treatment and the diagnosis is that they really need because of this fundamental conflict of interest. So rather than getting the months of physical therapy and the expensive MRIs, the worker is just getting 2 weeks light duty or something like that. The other thing to note is that companies often want workers to go to their preferred clinic so that they can be drug tested. And so in Illinois, where recreational marijuana is legal, that is causing a huge issue. So even if a particular worker isn't actually high on the job, if they smoked weed last weekend, there might be some still in their system, and then they're going to fail the drug test and they're going to get denied workers' comp. And so in those kind of situations, I always recommend that the worker, if the company wants them to go to their preferred, healthcare provider, the worker does need to go. As I said before, in Illinois, you have the right to base your workers' comp claim off what your own doctor says. But if your employer wants you to go to their clinic, you go, and then you go to your own doctor afterwards. But if they drug test you at their clinic and you fail, this is when it's very important for the worker to talk to a workers' comp attorney. And this is really one of the only times I can think of in this whole area of law where it's important for somebody to talk to an attorney if they're seriously injured or made ill because of their work. And it's just because it's a very complicated area of law, and a workers' comp attorney is going to be able to fight things like a drug test or there's so many other provisions that workers are entitled to, like kind of lump sum payments for pain and suffering and things like that attorney's going to be able to negotiate those rates in a way that all the rest of us couldn't. So I just recommend that if you know somebody who's injured on the job, tell them to contact an attorney, and not the attorney who's like, on the daytime commercials, like, did you get injured at work? Not that guy. Talk to the attorneys that are, in your community who are working for the most part with unions and organized labor. They take non-union clients, and those are the ones who are going to be looking out most for workers' interests. So this is a form of wage theft. We already talked about wage theft, and so obviously this is just another type, not paying the money that's entitled under workers' comp would be a form of wage theft. And so, like I said, here's some list of documenting strategies. And so really kind of keeping track of calendar info, contact info, photos, hospital records, workers' comp forms. And, over the years doing this job, it used to be that I would help folks do this and we'd practice journaling and things. And nowadays, I have so many students and everybody does everything on their phone. And that's fine. It doesn't really matter as long as you're being consistent in doing it. If you're having an issue with your manager at work and it's passive aggressive and seems discriminatory, but you're not really sure, it's so important for that individual just to start documenting it every single time it happens. So on this date, at this time, my manager, Mark, came up to me and said this, and Maria was a witness. She saw it happen. Those incidents, if an individual is good at tracking them over time, that's how you build a case of discrimination or any other sort of violation that you're trying to deal with on the job. All right, before I move on, were there questions about that? That was a lot of information very quickly, guys. But like I said, this is just an introduction today.
No, there are no questions in the chat.
Okay. All right, let's go on to the next question. Quiz question. Jeremy waits tables at an Olive Italiano restaurant in Peoria. His shift starts at 11 a.m., but his manager insists he arrive by 10:40 a.m. so that his station is ready for the lunch service. Is Olive Italiano required to pay Jeremy for this extra 15 minutes? Let's do the poll.
Okay, I have launched the poll. Let's give everyone 30 seconds to answer, roughly. Okay, so it looks about half of us have already answered. So I'm going to go ahead and end it and share the results. So everyone who answered said yes.
Awesome. Okay, yes. That one was a little bit easier. Sorry. Where did I put my... It's amazing after like 2 years of doing this that like it's still hard sometimes to like navigate. Again. There we go. So yes, even though it's only 15 minutes, that 15 minutes over the course of a week or month obviously adds up, and that's real money. But you know, while everybody on this call knew that that was wage theft and illegal, this happens all the time, right? How many folks like need to be ready to go right when their shift starts, and that's not giving them any sort of time to do the prep and set up things. And so Jeremy needs to be keeping track of those hours. And so my recommendation to him would be, you know, in your phone, in your calendar, wherever you keep track of stuff, just every single day, write down what time you're, what time you actually start work, what time you clock in, and then, you know, kind of keep what time you take breaks, all of these things. And I've had students that just doing that and keeping, you know, notes in a paper calendar have been able to resolve issues without even having to file a complaint with the government or anything like that. They've been able to just show their calendar to their manager and be like, hey, you know, I think my check is short. And a lot of times it's just human error, right? The check is short because of whatever reason, and then they're cut a new check right away. Other times it's because the worker, you know, realizes, oh, I forgot to write down, I left early that day because I was sick. So that's why it's you know, it's helpful to keep track of your hours and your breaks and all that consistently every single day, so that you're able to actually compare your check to see if it's what you're actually owed. And so I had a student just like 2 weeks ago I was teaching in Kankakee, and he told me that he worked at Pizza Hut, and the night before he's a dishwasher there, and his shift was supposed to end at 9:30 or something, but and they made him clock out then, but there was still lots of dirty dishes. And so he was there till 11 washing dishes and knew he wasn't going to get paid for that hour and a half. And he's like, is that wage theft? I was like, yes, that's wage theft. Absolutely. Right. Like if they want you continuing to do work, you need to get paid for that work. Right. And so here I put together a list of all the different, lots of different forms of wage theft. And so we see it in failure to pay overtime. And so that's, you know, maybe just getting paid straight time or not getting, you know, time and a half, violating minimum wage laws, misclassifying employees, taking illegal deductions from paychecks. And so this is another really good exercise you can do with workers, is like when they're looking at their paychecks and trying to decipher what all the different deductions are, figuring out which ones are, actual like required taxes and which ones are questionable. And so certainly having any deductions for PPE, personal protective equipment, would be illegal. Deductions for uniforms may or may not be illegal, depending on kind of what on a lot of other questions, and without going too much into the weeds, but it may or may not be illegal. I've seen deductions for cleaning costs, for uniform cleaning costs that were exorbitant, and just finding out that, the cleaning company is owned by the employer's brother-in-law or something, there's so many different ways that workers get nickeled and dimed. So in this case, requiring workers to work for no pay or off the clock, stealing workers' tips. And so it's legal in businesses where workers earn tips to have that tipped worker share their tips, either in tip pooling with other servers or bussers or bartenders, but never to require them pay those tips to managers. That's illegal. I remember when I first moved back to Chicago, I'm from Chicago, but I moved away for a long time. And when I first came back, I don't know when it was, 15 years ago, I got a job as a cocktail waitress just to make ends meet. And the very first night, the manager at the end of my shift said, okay, 10% of your tips go to the house. And by this point, I had already been working in this field, worker rights field, for many years. And I was like, you can't do that. And so I quit after one night. I mean, I tried to get the other servers riled up, but nobody seemed to really care. But that kind of stuff, I think it's just, that it happens all the time, right? Not paying workers for training. That is also something that I see, especially with workers who are newly arrived in this country, who aren't aware of their rights on the job. I see so many incidents of unpaid training, mandatory training. And that is, for the most part, all illegal. Not paying out accrued vacation or sick time, paying with checks that bounce, or suddenly closing a business without paying a final check. So when we think about who's at risk for wage theft, so wage theft is happening across the spectrum. It happened to me, and I am an educated white citizen. English is my first language, but the incidence of looking at these kinds of violations, especially wage theft, it only just gets higher and higher and higher when you look at all the different ways that folks are discriminated against. And so young workers, immigrant workers, especially those who are undocumented, ex-offenders, returning citizens who don't have a lot of options, who are facing discrimination because of that criminal conviction, which for the most part is legal, though there are some exceptions. I think just workers of color in general are face a lot of these issues, women, working mothers. And then there are certain industries that we know that we've studied that maintain a culture of wage theft. So I did a study of car wash workers in 2012 and surveyed workers at 70% of the car washes in Chicago. And, I think we didn't find even one car wash that wasn't committing wage theft. I mean, that's just the nature of the business model. Temp agencies oftentimes engage in wage theft. Non-union construction and domestic work are ones that where we just see this happen a lot. This is kind of an old chart. This is 2012, but just kind of giving you a sense of when we're talking, kind of relatively thinking about the incidence of wage theft compared to other types of thefts like robberies. Wage theft really dwarfs the other kinds of robberies that occur where, folks actually go to jail. And so this is a really, really, really large issue. And so for Jeremy, I would recommend that he's keeping track of his hours, he's keeping track of his check stubs, if they're paper copies in a folder, otherwise photos of them or whatever he needs to do electronically to keep a track of them. a journal of the tips he receives, and then also collecting contact information. So with any of these types of violations, they're absolutely a strength in numbers. And so if this company, Olive Italiano, has a practice of stealing or making workers work off the clock, Jeremy is probably going to have a much greater success of filing a wage theft complaint and getting back pay if he and half a dozen of his coworkers file that complaint together. Because if it's happening to him, it is probably happening to some of his coworkers too. And so making sure that, you know, you have a good sense of who it is you're working with and who you can talk to and who you can, you know, trust to, or I mean, not even trust, but who you can rely on, who might be willing to stand up for their rights as well is really valuable. So next question, a global pandemic plus polar vortex means that most of Olive Italiano's business has switched to takeout orders. Jeremy no longer has tables to wait and is helping package customer orders. Before the pandemic, Jeremy was paid a tip sub-minimum wage in addition to his tips. Can his employer continue doing this now? This one I made it tricky by putting in depends.
So I'm about to close it here. We still have some people answering though. I'll go ahead and end it and then share the results we can all see.
So here, we saw some division, and I think, you know, the folks who chose depends were probably sensible, seeing that I put that answer there. You know, I don't think we have enough information necessarily to know whether or not this is legit. And so really it has to do with how much money he's earning in tips from takeout orders, right? And so I know that during the pandemic, I think a lot of folks have gotten into the habit of putting tips on takeout orders in addition to you know, whatever they normally do, just because tip workers are suffering so much. And so it depends on how much he's getting in tips. So minimum wages generally, right, it's the floor, it's the lowest amount per hour an employer can pay a worker. Federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour still, and that sets the floor for US workers. But minimum wage levels can vary by state, county, city, and even by occupation. And so in Illinois, in Cook County and city of Chicago, we have higher minimum wages than the federal minimum wage. There are also sub-minimum wages for workers under 18, for tip workers, and also for some workers with disabilities. And this is where we really see a lot of issues and incidences of wage theft. When I am teaching longer classes, we spend time kind of going into the labor history of this and why it is we have sub-minimum wages. These were exemptions that were put into place when the first federal minimum wage laws were passed under the New Deal in the 1930s. And so, you know, really just thinking about who was excluded from those protections, who were earning tips in the 1930s, right? It was a lot of Black workers, it was women, it was immigrants, right? And so this whole idea of a sub-minimum wage, that you can pay somebody less than the minimum wage floor, and that depending on, you know, their service or whatever other qualifications they're going to get tips, is pretty antiquated. And there are states like California that have made it illegal. So in California, they just have a flat minimum wage for everybody, right? They don't have sub-minimum wages because the whole notion of having a sub-minimum wage encourages discrimination. I mentioned to you all that I used to have these cocktail waitressing and bartending jobs. I know that if I worked one of those jobs now, I probably would make half as much in tips as I did 20 years ago, just because I'm not willing to put up with the nonsense and harassment that I did when I was a young woman. And that has nothing to do with my ability to, make delicious cocktails. It really is just how much grief I'm willing to put up with to earn a wage. And that's, so that it's a recipe for discrimination and for sexual harassment. And, this is, when thinking about the other exemptions for sub-minimum wages, young workers and workers with disabilities, I think that we could have like a much longer discussion. Also just thinking about what does that do then? So in Chicago, when the minimum wage first went up, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I heard anecdotally of a lot of different fast food establishments hiring under 18s, because at that time, under 18s could still earn this sub-minimum wage, the state sub-minimum wage, which was a lot less than the city of Chicago minimum wage. And so all of a sudden, employers saw like how that they could discriminate against older workers. By older, I mean 18 and up, by hiring young workers and paying them a lot less. And so there's a lot of problems with that. This is this a cheat sheet of wages in Illinois and surrounding areas. And so why I like to keep a sheet like this always updated is because, when workers are looking at those minimum wage posters at their place of employment, there might be 3 different posters with 3 different wage amounts. And so having it all there on one page, I think is really helpful. And including overtime hours, tip workers, and then young workers, youth workers, I think is important too. And then especially, given that we're surrounded by states that have lower minimum wages than Illinois, there's a lot of issues, I think, in some of these border communities where employers are taking advantage of the confusion of these different wage levels, and then the fact that they can pay workers a whole lot less if they just cross that state border. In Cook County, we passed this higher minimum wage, but because of the way our state constitution is set up, municipalities could opt out of this higher minimum wage. And it's also for paid sick leaves. This also happened. So in Cook County, of the 120 or 130 municipalities in Cook County, I think in the end, only less than 10 of them opted in for the higher minimum wage. Everybody else opted out. And so that creates even more confusion, I think, for workers who are trying to navigate this scenario. I talked about how when I was teaching in the southeast side, that a lot of people were just working in different places, and so different laws applied to them. But that happens even in where I live in Evanston. In Evanston, we did not opt out of the higher wage, but if I traveled 6 blocks south and was in Chicago, we would have a higher wage. If I went over to Skokie, they have the higher wage, but then Lincolnwood right next to that doesn't have the higher wage. And so it's kind of a mess, to say the very least. And so, Jeremy, obviously, I think it's kind of the same tactics for documenting. All right, we have just a couple of more, and then we're gonna get into people's questions. All right, so Brianna is 7 months pregnant and works as a cashier at Dollar Commander in Kankakee. Her OBGYN says she cannot be on her feet for an 8-hour shift. Can she be fired for not being able to stand and operate her cash register?
Okay, I went and shared the results.
All right, so a little bit of a division, but I think most folks realize that are aware that pregnant workers are protected against discrimination on the job. And so while on face value, we might see that, like, clearly Brianna is being discriminated against, and that her employer should be accommodating her. They should be, lowering her register, or rotating her shifts so that sometimes she's able to sit and sometimes she stands, things like that. Those are all different ways of accommodating. The problem with this scenario, and what I would do if I was like using any sort of discrimination scenario in a class, is think about all the ways that employers illegally discriminate without being so explicit about it, right? Most employers are not going to be stupid enough to say they're firing somebody because they're pregnant, or they're firing somebody because they don't like Christians, or like they don't like Black people. I mean, employers aren't going to do that, but they're gonna find some other sort of pretense to fire her if they really want to get rid of her. So in this situation, I would say, I would kind of change the wording of it and say maybe, okay, well, Brianna, she's told them that she needs to have some accommodations, and so her manager's already really annoyed with her, and so one day when she comes back to work after her lunch shift, she's 10 minutes late getting back from lunch, and she gets fired on the spot. Is that legal? And that's where you start to really get into the weeds, right? Because on face value, firing her because she's late does seem like a legit or legal reason to fire somebody, right? We know she's at will, that she can be fired for pretty much any reason, unless it's an illegal reason. But the question then there is, if Brianna already sensed that her employer was engaging in some illegal discrimination and giving her a hard time for being pregnant, then were they using that her late arrival back from lunch as a pretense to illegally discriminate? And how one proves that is by looking at whether she's being treated differently than other employees. So does she have coworkers that also have been late to their shifts, but weren't fired? And what's the difference between Brianna and those people? Well, she's pregnant and they aren't. And so is she being treated differently than others because of her pregnancy? Yes. So it's proving disparate treatment, which is not an easy thing to prove. And so this is where, like, I really like getting into these discrimination scenarios with people, because you can do this for a whole wide range of different types of discrimination, whether it has to do with pregnancy or gender or race or ethnicity, or disability. I mean, there's so many different ways that people are discriminated against. And really, when it comes down to it, is like thinking about trying to prove how they are being treated differently. And so one of the best situations would be for Brianna to find some other pregnant worker who was also suffering, this kind of abuse, and then filing a complaint with them together. Or maybe everybody knows that as soon as you are visibly pregnant at this dollar commander, the manager is going to fire you. Are there past employees that used to work there that she could file a complaint with? I mean, I realize that Brianna, being 7 months pregnant, maybe doesn't want to work at Dollar Commander forever, but it, it's really not up to me or anybody else to make that determination. And I think that there are times that it is absolutely worth it to fight for your job. And so there's so many different ways that you can explore this pretense issue. The different ways employers discriminate against working mothers and things like that. And so it's really just showing if they're treating you differently than other people. This would be a great video clip if we had time for it, but we will not look at it. But it's a you guys can look at it. It's I think like a 2020 news segment where they were looking at this issue of pretenses and illegal discrimination on the job. And so just kind of showing all the sketchy ways that different employers will act like they're legally firing somebody, but actually it's based on an illegal reason and they're just using pretenses, and so then it's illegal. And so it's just kind of all the tricks and traps. So yeah, so just kind of thinking through the different documenting strategies. She should be journaling incidents with discriminatory behavior and comments. So if her manager like keeps making the comments to her about how big she's getting or things like that, she needs to be writing it down every single time. In Illinois, we have the right to review our personnel files, all of us as employees, twice a year. And if there is information in that file that you find to be erroneous, you can submit your own amended version to be included in the file. You can make copies of things in the file. And so it's also a good idea, especially if you're having issues on the job, to get in the habit of doing this. If they're saying Brianna is a bad worker for whatever reason, but she has a personnel file full of glowing reviews, or maybe even beyond that, maybe she was employee of the month at some point and they put her picture on the wall, you know, that would be a documenting strategy, just to take a photo of that picture, right? How are they going to say that she's a bad employee when they're calling her the employee of the month? And these sorts of same strategies, one is going to use, you know, even if they do legally lose their job, a lot of times workers have to use these kind of strategies in winning their unemployment. So different employers will fight unemployment claims regardless of the reason why you were fired. And in order to win your unemployment claims, oftentimes you have to kind of use this same sort of proof and documents in order to get that money. And so in the curriculum, there's a whole section on unemployment and kind of just like best practices for winning those claims. All right, I think we will just do this one real quick one, and then I think the last 10 minutes, we can do some questions. So Melanie has a felony conviction from 15 years ago for stealing some clothes from a store. She's been out of work for a while and she feels that she never receives callbacks from her job applications because of her criminal record. Is this legal? This is a trick question, guys. Sorry that I'm ending on a trick question. You have to pay attention to the wording very closely.
Okay, I've gone and shared the results.
All right, so about 2/3 of you think that that's legal. You would be incorrect. And it's because of the wording in the question. And so why this is illegal, this particular scenario, is because I said that she feels she never gets callbacks from her job applications. Okay, and that's what the key terms are in this scenario that determine legality. So in Illinois, We have this ban the box legislation that was passed under Governor Quinn like 10 years ago. And that makes it illegal for job applications to ask a question about criminal convictions, felony convictions, okay? That does not make it illegal to discriminate, for an employer to discriminate against somebody because they have a criminal conviction, but it makes it illegal for them to ask about it on the job application. And so why does that matter? Well, for folks who are filling out job applications and have to check that box and know that they can't lie about it, for the most part, those applications prior to this law being enacted, those applications, would probably just go in the garbage. What this law allows is so that, like, by getting rid of that box, it allows folks to be able to kind of get their foot in the door, at least get to an interview. And then at that point, the employer is allowed to ask about criminal convictions, and the job candidate, has the chance to say, okay, but this was 15 years ago. These are all the things I've done to, rehabilitate my life since then. These are all the reasons why I'm qualified for the job. I really hope you, give me a chance. And then the employer could still say, no, I don't want ex-felons working here, or they might give her a chance. So the answer is no, because of this ban the box legislation about job applications. So even though this law has been on the books for 10 years, it really has only started being enforced under Governor Pritzker's administration. And so I'm sure if any of you all, when you're out and about, like go to, whatever retail establishment or fast food, and you ask for a job application, very depressingly, like 9 times out of 10, they're still going to have that box. And so what I tell workers who are looking for jobs is that when they see that, if they want to file a complaint with the Illinois Department of Labor, they absolutely should. But it also is a really good indication right there on the job application that this maybe is not the best employer, right? If they're already breaking the law on the job application, that's not a good sign. And I realize that not all of us have choices and need jobs when we need jobs, but it's important to realize that, like, we do have this law, and it's one that's really important that we start enforcing on a much larger scale. So just as some final thoughts, and then let's open it up for some questions or discussions, is like kind of just thinking about what are the worker rights issues that you think most affect the populations you're serving. We touched on a number today, but there are so many more. And so, like, I really encourage you to think deeply about this and kind of talk to your coworkers and maybe ask, just like ask around so you can figure it out. Where in your day-to-day programming could you potentially include some of this stuff? And so I gave you some ideas in the very beginning, but that whole curriculum is just chock full of ideas. And then also, like, kind of even bigger picture, do you have concerns or reservations about talking about these issues in the context of workforce development? I have heard many times that people are concerned that their employer partners won't want them engaging in this kind of educational programming because they're so worried that all these workers are just going to rise up and go on strike. And I really, when I hear that stuff, I validate their concerns, but I think that it's important to recognize that everything we've talked about for the last hour and a half are laws, first of all. And second of all, like, the people that we work with are rational human beings, right? That have bills to pay and mouths to feed. And I think that people only go on strike and take those kind of actions when they are pushed to, and it absolutely is, the only solution left, in the only tool left in the toolbox. And to remember that if somebody goes on strike, they're not getting paid when they're on strike, right? It's really just withholding your labor is like the very last tool that we have as workers. So those are my final thoughts. I will stop the share and we can you put questions and comments in chat box. You can put your microphone on. You can not do that. I'm just available if anybody wants to talk about anything.
There is no questions in the chat, but we will give everyone a couple seconds to go ahead and unmute themselves, and feel free to ask Allison any questions.
I also just a couple of notes. One, please fill out that registration form for me. I really, really, really appreciate it. If you fill that out too, then I will have your email address and I can let you know about the upcoming Train the Trainers, where we spend like 12 hours, 12 or 16 hours getting into the weeds and really interactive activities going into this stuff. And so I'll let you know about that. And what else? Thank you all. I appreciate you. Please, you have my email. So any other issues or questions, I will do my best to try to address them. Just feel free to email me. Kristen, do you know, like this program of doing these worker rights webinars as part of the like JTED training? This is only the last couple of years we've done them, right? Do you have any sense of like why it is that this now is on folks' radar that we're doing this?
I do not. I'm not sure if there's anyone else from DCEO that can speak to that. I am just work for the support center that supports the execution of the JTED NOFO TA sessions. So I wasn't in the portion of planning for any of the TA sessions for any of the NOFOs. If there's anyone else on the DCEO, Kenneth replied, Kenneth Williams, she's a part of OET. She said, we are absolutely focused on equity as we move forward with all work at DCEO, and this is a huge part.
Love
so
that.
There's your answer.
I love that. So immediately after this meeting or after this call, I'm going to be meeting with a partner who works for the Chicagoland Workforce Funders Alliance. And we have been working with a group of folks for the last couple of years who are really, really committed to this issue and are leaders in the workforce world and in policy. And our hope is to really force, I don't know, force is not a good word, require agencies to start incorporating all this stuff, but then also providing a lot of additional funding and training so that people feel confident and equipped to do so, not just giving people extra work. So hopefully that means we will see a lot more of this on the horizon. So that is, and that's pretty cool because even with this curriculum, it's the first of its kind in the country. Nothing else like this exists. So we're really proud that in Illinois, we're doing this kind of work. I guess if there's no other questions or anything we can check out. I mean, I'm happy to stick around if anybody wants to talk offline, but.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Allison, for your time today. And thank you to everyone for your time this afternoon. We will be sending out some marketing with all of the recordings thus far for the technical assistance sessions. We have one more tomorrow. Just a quick plug for that one. It's the Equity and Employment Plan technical assistance session, and it is tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. So if you are able to attend that, make sure you register. You can register on the NOFO website, which I've put ahead and put in the chat already. I'll go ahead and put it in there again. And some marketing will be going out again today to promote that last session, along with all the recordings are posted on that website for all of the previous sessions we've had for the TA sessions. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time this afternoon, and have a great rest of your Tuesday.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye.